So, for argument's sake, let's assume your characters need to travel through air, and let's assume they need a vehicle. So, how does this vehicle fly? Speaking of flying vehicles, there are basically about four ways to do this. There are more than four, but these four are the easiest or the most common ways to do it. So, method number one, and actually the method used by humans to achieve flight first, is to be lighter than air. That is, make a vehicle that is lighter than air. So you can think of a helium balloon, hot air balloons, airships, and so on. So this type of flight uses the Archimedes principle to be airborne. So what it is we use the upthrust. So the upthrust of anything submerged in a fluid is equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. So if you think of us, we displace air standing on the surface of the earth. But because we're a lot heavier than the air we displace, the upthrust doesn't make us float. When you think of, say, something like a jellyfish, it displaces more water in terms of weight than its own body mass. So that's why it floats in water. Even fish do that using a swim bladder. So this method of flight is pretty easy to accomplish. So provided you can find a gas that is lighter than your ambient air. So what we usually use is helium. It's non-flammable, it's inert, but it's also pretty expensive. Hydrogen is an option, but it's very flammable if you manage to mix it with the air, and you don't want to be 500 feet in the air when your balloon catches on fire. That is primarily why it's not used in most applications nowadays. Hot air is a very good option because the gas itself is not flammable, but you need a fuel source and the fuel will be flammable, and you need to carry fuel, and the fuel weight will reduce, along the flight. But other than that, that's a pretty good compromise. You can change altitude on this type of vehicle by changing the overall density of your vehicle. So what you can do is you can reduce the amount of your lightweight gas, as in release it to lose altitude, or you could drop something heavy like base salt that you carried on board in order to gain altitude. The second method is to direct air downwards or create a force downwards so that you can use the reaction from it to move up. So think of helicopters or jetpacks. Both of them fall into the same category. So the advantage here is you can take off from pretty much anywhere. I mean, if you're going to use a jetpack, you need some sort of flame resistant surface. But other than that, you can take off from anywhere, and the vehicle isn't going to be massive like in the previous case, like if you're using a huge balloon to lift. The disadvantage here is going to be fuel requirement. So if you think of a helicopter, it's going to be more efficient than a jetpack, but still, you're going to need to produce enough force to lift it off the ground and to keep it up there. And also you need another method of propulsion in order to move it forwards. So a helicopter does this by tilting the fan, but if you're using something like a jetpack to produce lift, then you either need to transition it to a forward engine, or you need a separate engine to move it forwards, which will also increase the fuel requirement. Third method is to use a fixed wing. So think of airliners, general aviation, most fighter jets and transport aircraft you see, and gliders, hang gliders. All of them use fixed wing flight. So here how you generate lift is using the shape of a lifting surface, say a wing or even the whole vehicle. This creates an upward force using the speed of the vehicle itself. This is generally more efficient than straight up producing the thrust to lift it up. Also, these tend to be faster than most other methods. You can also have an unpowered version in gliders where you capture the air currents to generate the lift you need. But the problem here is landing and takeoff. You need a long, clear area, a clear path in order to take off and land. And because of the high speeds and the proximity to the ground when you're doing this, takeoffs and landings can be generally dangerous. So modern airliners and airports are designed to minimize this risk as much as possible. But if you're dealing with early days of aviation or a society that is just discovering this type of flight, this is a point you can consider. And a rather dangerous way to get over the takeoff problem is to possibly launch it off a cliff. This will probably work with, say, hang gliders if you have somewhere further down where you can land, but you wouldn't want to do this with a whole airplane for obvious reasons. So the fourth method is using flapping wings. So you should probably limit this one to relatively smaller vehicles because that's where this is the most efficient. So this is mostly seen in birds and And even the larger birds who use this type of flight usually use it to take off and then use a lot of fixed wing flight for, say, gliding. And also, when you think of birds, the smaller ones, such as hummingbirds, may be going into a completely different region of flight. But if you think of most normal birds, this is the type of flight that they use. There have been, human-sized ones that have been constructed that work. So this type of flight is pretty efficient, but the problem is mechanical complexity if you want to make a machine that uses this type of flight. You can take off from most places. I mean, you might need a little bit of a run up. Heavy birds use it, but it's not going to be as long as a runway for a conventional airplane. And also another advantage is you can change this type of flight into the fixed wing type once you have taken off, or if you want to glide. So these are not the only ways you can achieve flight, but these are the most practical methods for generally vehicle sized things. This video has been a surface level introduction to the types of flight you can use, but I will be going into each in more detail later. But for now, this is it. See you next time.